Hi, this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And we have a fascinating story today to tell you. And the author is Patricia Bonis, and the name of her book is JEDDAH Bride. Hi, Patricia.
Hi, Patsy. How are you?
Okay, great. Well, it's so
Good.
nice that you were able to join me. We talked on the radio a month or so ago, and I had so many people just sending me wonderful emails about the book and then about the interview and wanting to know more. And well, here you are. It's so nice to have
Thank
you here.
thank you so much, and thank you for your interest in Jeddah Bride. I'm so happy to share it, and this is really great. I'm so pleased at the reception this book has gotten.
Well, you've gotten quite a bit of publicity. There have been some really great articles written.
I know there was this article that I totally didn't expect in the Daily News, and I had it circulates all over the world, but especially in England, and a lot of the people that are involved in my story live in England, and they were all they were all shocked and pleasantly surprised to see that I had actually written a book. A lot of them asked my daughter if I could send them an autographed copy of the book, which I'm doing now, and it's great. I'm happy that the story is getting out and people are hearing about this subject a little more, about a subject that nobody knows too much about.
Well, it's fascinating. Your entire story is so interesting. You're talking to us, I think, from your office here. You
I
are in
am. I'm here. I'm in Florida, West Palm Beach,
a
and this is my
beautiful
office, my
office.
design office.
Yes, because you have a wonderful business. But let's go back to the beginning so you can tell people this story. It is really intriguing. There's a thrilling aspect, a mystery aspect. So as people are reading it, they don't know what's going to happen. So just tell us about, first of all, where were you from, and what how did you end up being a Jeddah bride?
Okay, well, I grew up in New York in Long Island. I grew up in a small town called Sands Point. It was on the water, and all summer long I would be in a boat, a small Boston whaler, water skiing and hanging out with my friends. And as I got older, I was a teenager. I became, I was very adventurous. I was rebellious. That was very common in those days, in the 70s and the 80s. We came out of the hippie era, and kids were trying to get rid of the old ways. All the women's lib was starting, and the drugs were circulating, and people wanted to. My generation at the time wanted to be different and break free. And I did that. I did that. I rebelled against my parents. I rebelled against the very strict background. I was born Italian American Catholic, and I didn't like anything. I didn't like restrictions. I didn't like, I was pretty rebellious. So I went away to college, and I met this man that was the most exotic. It was like he was good looking. He was wild. He was British accent. I had just been in England that summer on vacation with my parents, and I was so enthralled with England and Carnaby Street, the whole English thing. And here's a man who had grown up in England, but yet he was Saudi Arabian, and he had that accent, and he'd been in boarding school there, but yet he was so exotic and came from a country where we were just learning that how they lived. This was the time of the oil embargo, and people were learning about Saudi Arabia, and here was a Saudi Arabian man that grew up in England. He had all the bells and whistles that I needed, and I got to know him, and I fell deeper and deeper in love with him, and he was in love with me too. And so we proceeded to date for several years, and then we got married. And the only problem was I went to his country, and it was pretty shocking. I describe it. I tried to make it a little light and fun. I had all dressed up in my Paris, my outfit, my suit, and I came down the steps at the airport with my scarf fluttering in the breeze. so I expected. And instead, I got a burst of 115-degree heat. Yeah, I thought it was exhaust from the airplane engines, but it was the weather in Saudi Arabia. And I was like, oh my God, there's a what? And I looked down, and in front of me, it looked like biblical times, except for the limousines with the sirens. Everything else, there were goats, there were people with crutches that were made out of wood. It looked like Ben Hur. I felt like I was in the year 2000 BC. And there I was. And I just couldn't believe it. I didn't even know places like that existed on the earth. And from there, it only got worse. I had several shocking experiences in Saudi Arabia, and even more compelling were the stories that were circulating, stories about women that were being tortured, and stories, all kinds of crazy stories. The long and short of it is that I realized that whereas in America, I love to be a rebellious young woman. I could get away with that. Nobody arrests you really for being rebellious unless you get violent or something. But in Saudi Arabia, you can get arrested and even worse, and nobody can help you. And even the United States doesn't want to get involved with that stuff. And I was made aware of that too. They won't help me. Like a lot. Right now we have hostages in an Arab country, and even with Jimmy Carter, who was the president during some part of the time of my marriage, and there were those hostages in Iran. We couldn't do anything about it. So if I had broken the law there, I would have been jailed, and who knows what would have happened to me. So I sobered up. I sobered up real fast.
So
So
there you are, a typical American girl, an Italian American girl, as a matter
yeah,
of fact, and that makes it sort of very special because we all have seen, what Italian American families are. They're close and they're talkative and they have fun and all the sort of cultural things that you're known for, and and just as you said, you were young and just a typical American girl. So, what are some of the things that you found, not just the cultural things, but the food, the houses? What I mean, where did you go from the time you got off the airplane? Where did you go? What was it like? What was your home like? How did you get along with the other people that were around you?
well, I actually that was a good part. I really liked the people in the family. They were very warm. They got together every single day. It's not like in America where we have our friends and our, business associates and men and women socialize together. It was really a core family life they had there every single day at 3 o'clock. I can promise you, when it's 3 o'clock, they're all sitting down at the table having lunch together, and grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody. So it was a very heavy, like a very heavily family oriented society. You marry mostly match made marriages. The mother matches her daughter or her son with another family's child, and you don't marry, like, let's say there are families that are together that are very related, interrelated. Mainly, you marry from those families. It's even rare that a girl from Jeddah, which is like, let's say, the New York, the business center of Saudi, very rare that a girl from Jeddah would marry even with a boy from Riyadh, which is the capital. That's even distant. You keep really to your own core of people, and it's ultra conservative. They're very very religious. They're not just like Catholics. They're like if you saw a Catholic lady that was like the grandmothers that wear like my grandmothers didn't do that. But there were some, they wear like a veil like over their head when they go to church. They cover their head. They're praying. They're always holding a rosary, counting. That's kind of how they are. Very very religious, and in a good way, not in a currently they've politicized religions a lot more than, but in those days it was just sincere devout religious belief, and they prayed 5 times a day, and that was really their life. They had family, they had praying, they had the marriages. like they have their own form of baptism. It's called Rahmani. So they do their baptism and they do their children, and that's their life, the family. Women did not work at the time. Now, from what I understand, they're working more and more. I know that women are allowed to drive now, but they were not allowed to drive in my day. Women were not allowed to walk on the street. Women were not allowed to do anything. They had to stay in their house. You get chauffeured around by your chauffeur, who's also like a bodyguard, and that's your life. You stay in your own little compound, and you then, when it's time to go, you pack up your suitcase and you go to the airport with your husband or your father accompanying you, and you leave the country. And then you can do what you want, whatever you feel like doing in that foreign country. But while you're in Saudi, you had to follow all the laws. And I believe it's still that way today. You have to follow the laws. They're very strict. So,
So, being a young bride, you were how old at that time?
well, I married him. I was 22.
So you're 22, uh, but you didn't have a career then. Did you have a career then?
No, and I had started when we lived in, okay, when we first got married, we had a few years in Saudi, and my chosen career path was, I'd been an art history major. I wanted to do something in the arts, either work in a museum, work in an art gallery, or design. That's my passion. And I've worked in that field, in the field of interior design, for over 30 years now. But I wanted that as a career, but I got married and I thought, well, I can do that maybe from Saudi. I thought maybe I could open an art gallery. I was an expert on Renaissance art and different forms of, like more like old master art. And I thought, well, that would be nice. I could do that. No, wrong. No art. No art is allowed in Saudi Arabia. At the time, you were not allowed to import art. They didn't like the image of people. That was forbidden. So you couldn't bring portraits in. You couldn't. In fact, I tried to get a landscape painting for my home. A landscape. It wasn't a picture of a person. It was a landscape, and I was not allowed to import it into the country. So I quickly gave up the idea of having an art gallery. So I then decided, well, maybe I just can't work here. But then luckily my husband at the time decided he wanted to go to law school. So thank goodness for our relationship. He decided we'll move to Washington, D.C. He got into Georgetown, and then we proceeded to move there. And I thought that was the salvation of our marriage. I thought that was going to be a new world for us, a new life where I could be me. And I started becoming an interior designer. I met someone that had a successful business and she wanted me to work with her. And so I started my career, and I still practice that. So that was really my calling. I would not have been able to do it in Saudi Arabia because I wouldn't have been able to go to people's homes. You can't walk into people's homes. They may have sons that are of age. They may have a husband there, and I'm in the house with them. You can't do that. Can't walk into other people's homes. So I would not have been able to do interior design there. Maybe I could have done it on the computer and emailed people the designs, but I could never have gone into their homes. So, I mean, if you think there's a million different obstacles when you're in that country, obstacles to living a modern life, you just really can't do it.
Did you have your own home or did you live with family? And did you expect that, thinking about becoming a new wife, did you imagine that like you were going to be cooking and have a kitchen and do the cooking yourself? What did you think of before you went? Were you prepared for the kind of lifestyle that you ended up having?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, I grew up, we had a housekeeper that did the cleaning, but that was it. When I got there, I realized there were so many servants in the house that you couldn't even, at first I couldn't even figure out who are all these people. And I quickly thought, okay, the ones with the ironed clothing, these white robes the men would wear, and the women wear a lot of jewelry. I figured those are the relatives. And then there were these other people, and they were carrying things or standing respectfully to the side. I figured, okay, all these other people must be the servants. And my husband said to me, well, he was my fiance at the time when I first arrived, said to me, just don't talk to anyone because you may be making a mistake. You'll never know who everyone is. There's hundreds of people around. We drove into the gates of his family house, and there were like 15 or 20 men just sitting watching TV out in the open air, and they were all with these white robes on. They all looked the same. And I thought, well, who are those people? They were servants. They watched TV at night, like the gate opener, one or two men that open the gates, gardeners, houseboys, like butlers, like a person that cleans the patio furniture, a person that cleans the swimming pool, for hundreds and hundreds of servants everywhere. So that was the one thing that was shocking. One of the first meals I ever ate, and they live happily together. They're all Most of the servants are from Egypt, Sudan, and Somalia, Ethiopia, because that's across the Red Sea. So it would be like, it's just, you could practically see Africa from Jeddah, which is on the Red Sea, on the east side of the Red Sea, and Africa is on the west coast of the Red Sea. So people would hire them. They lived with the family their whole life. And also, actually, there was legal slavery in Saudi Arabia until 1964. So when I got there, like in 1979, legal slavery had been banished, but there were people that had grown up in the household that had been slaves, and they were freed. They were free to go, but they had nowhere to go because they had never lived anywhere but in the house. So they stayed in the house. They slept in the servants' quarters. They did a little job. Maybe they cleaned, or maybe they ironed, and that was their job. And they were happy. So it was a very happy coexistence between all of those people. I think I was the only one who didn't really fit in. That's the truth. They didn't mind it. They were all happy with their lives. Life just went on. So I became like a disruptive force, I guess. You know.
So somebody did the cooking for you and served.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we had cooks, we had soup cooks, chefs, butlers, people that served food. The first night I had dinner there, we sat down at this long table, and literally the whole family was there to greet me. I had just arrived, and there was so much food. It looked like a wedding banquet. And we all sat down, and they gobble up that food so fast, and then they get up and they leave. And I was like, Italian Americans, we sit there at the tables for 3 hours, and somebody brings out some nuts, and we eat the nuts after dinner, and we eat the desserts, and then we decide, gee, I want to have a little more of that food and you bring more food. Yeah, and we talk. No, they eat and they get up and they go back into the sitting room. So I was sitting there like, well, what happened to the dinner party? It was like 10 minutes, it's over. Well, then the servants started coming in, and they're sitting down right on the chairs of where the people were, and they're eating. They're picking up the silverware or with their fingers, and they're eating all the leftover food, and they were happy. That's the way they did it in those days. I don't know if they still do it. Depends on how traditional the family is. I don't know. But at that time, that's what it was. Mostly the Ethiopian ladies were the women servants. They were so wonderful to me. They loved me. They loved Americans. Oh, they were so proud. My servant Asia was so proud to be working for an American. I mean, I have to tell you, they really thought we were like so great American. Oh, Ambrikia, Ambrikia. It was I felt so important. It was pretty amazing, but it was a culture. It was a big difference in culture. Big, big, big difference. You see it like that. Oh, one time I had this beautiful Yves Saint Laurent paisley skirt out of cotton, beautiful cotton paisley, very expensive. That was the stuff. Anyway, I thought there's no dry cleaners in this country, so how am I going to clean this thing? So I said, okay, I know how to do hand wash. I took a basin and I filled it with cold water. I put a little bit of Lux Flakes in, and I swooshed my skirt around. I thought, okay, squeeze a little swoosh. And then I was rinsing it. One of the servants walks in, and she's like, ah, she runs out and calls my mother-in-law and says, Patricia's doing laundry. And my mother-in-law comes running in and says, never do that again. Never. Never do that again. I said, but it's Yves Saint Laurent. I don't want them to. It's so delicate. I don't. No, no. Do not ever wash anything. Do not nothing. Do not wipe dust off. Do not do anything. Do not do clean a fork. You hand it to the servant. They will clean it for you, and they'll bring it back to you. If I wanted a Kleenex, I should say, hand me a Kleenex, and they bring the Kleenex box, and I can pluck my Kleenex from it. That was the way they lived. It was. I grew up. My parents used to make me do yard work before they would take me to our club in the summer. I wanted to, go in the boat and water ski. My mom would say, "Okay, you have to pick weeds, a penny a weed." I'd have to fill bags with weeds, the crabgrass, and they'd make me hose off the patio. And then they'd say, "Okay, now we'll take you to the club." Now I was forced to do work when I was a kid, make my own bed, clean the dishes if nobody was around. Yeah. And I was fine with that. That's life, but there, no, no, no.
Now, here's an important question. What
Hmm.
about spaghetti and lasagna? Did did they have it?
No. But they did appreciate it. And well, I couldn't cook, but if I taught my cook how to make something Italian, I could bring it to my mother-in-law's house and, say, "Oh, I have something for you that the chef cooked." And I could have them, and they love foreign food. They would love to eat like ravioli and tomato sauce. That would have been meatballs. That would have been their thrill. So they were open to it, but they did not allow me to cook. I did not cook. I did not ever cook. And there was the Arabic diet, which actually is a good diet. I'm very down to earth with what I eat. They had good salad, nice fresh salads with cucumbers and tomatoes and lettuce and that. That Lebanese, the Lebanese salad where it's all chopped up and you put oil and vinegar. So that was healthy. And they'd have all that Arabic food that people know, hummus and those little meatballs and that stuff. And then they ate a lot of lamb, but it was mostly Saudi food, Saudi recipes. They had 100 ways to make a lamb. We'd eat the lamb brains, we'd eat the lamb tongue, we'd eat lamb pate, all kinds of things with lamb. And actually, my servants, all the Ethiopian ladies, they lived on the roof of my house. There were like 15 of them. And sometimes I'd go up there and sit with them, and they'd be in a circle. They had like a little coal fire that they made, little hot coals, and they had like a little coffee pot, their little Ethiopian coffee pots cooking on the coals, and they'd offer me coffee, and I'd sit down with them in a circle, and they're like, "Oh my God, she's sitting with us." And they told me stories about Ethiopia, all the different people that came and colonialized their country. The English came and they brought schools. The French came and they brought really good food. The Italians were so kind to us. Like, they told us stories about their country, and they were so appreciative that I sat with them and listened. So there was a lot of wonderful relationships I had with people and nice experiences. I think the only problem was my husband.
Well, let's get back now to your wedding. So you had a wedding in Jeddah,
Mhm.
and your parents came
Mhm.
from America?
Yes. Yes, I was kind of rough with my parents at the time. I kind of got to the point where I was tired of their disapproving, and I said, called them up and I said, "Look, we're getting married and you've got to show up here." And they were on their way to Europe for the summer, and I said, "On your way to Europe, you're going to have to come to Saudi Arabia for a few days because I'm having a wedding and you must be here." Looking back, they probably could have not showed up. I could have made some excuse because Valerie, my cousin in law, was from England, and her parents had never been to Saudi. She was married and had a kid. They never had been there yet. But my parents were a little more worldly than Valerie's parents. They traveled all over, and I said, "You got to come here. There's going to be a wedding. Just get your fancy clothes, show up, and tell me what date you can, get on a plane. Tell me what date we'll pick you up at the airport." So my poor parents had to do that. They did it for me, and my two sisters showed up, and we gave them a suite at the hotel, the best hotel, And I don't think they enjoyed their visit. They were really overwhelmed by the everything. They were overwhelmed. My dad said the chanting 5 times a day prayer, every 2 blocks is a mosque. You'd hear this constantly, the prayer going on, and you couldn't leave your hotel room. You couldn't walk in the streets, even for a man. Well, there's no place to walk anyway, but everything was, with the servants standing next to you. My dad said, I feel like I have no privacy. I feel like there's somebody lurking. I can't stand it. So they stayed through the wedding, and then the next day, 1 or 2 days after, they left, and they never went back. I think it was just too much for them. It was a lot for me, but I was young and adventurous. They weren't. And my sisters, well, they thought it was a little bit fascinating. One lady, my ex husband's partner's mother, was enthralled with my sister Diane, and she said to my mother-in-law, "Why don't we make a match? The two sisters, they married the two boys, and then we'll have two sisters together in Saudi, and they'll be happier because Patricia will have her sister with her, and Diane is not married, and she's so pretty. She can marry my son, Osama." Yeah. So my sister hightailed it out of there. She was. It was very, very, very different than you've ever experienced. Um,
Okay, so now you didn't keep like a stash of peanut butter and jelly.
No, you know what? Well, I had my own house, and I couldn't cook in the kitchen because that was where the chef was, but I had my own little upstairs kitchen, and I like Cheerios. I had a little thing of with milk and Cheerios, and I could make myself my own little tea as long as nobody saw me making it. And in those days, we're not that way today, but in my generation, we didn't really like food. We didn't really eat. We were so skinny. I was so skinny. Sometimes I'd go the whole day without eating. I would pick on my food. I wanted to be skinny, and I was, and twiggy. That was it. That was the culture. So I didn't care. I didn't care what I ate. I just pick on things, and it was enough for me. Yeah.
So after a few years, then you come to America,
Yes, we
and
came to
now
America.
now you're back, and are you living a normal American life, cooking and
Well,
cleaning, and or
Well,
not
I
quite?
had hoped we would be, but I suspect that my ex-husband, was after because he had lived in Saudi for about now 5 years, 2 years before we married, and 3 years after we married. So now we had 5 years of being, the emperor of his kingdom. And I think he got infected with he wasn't that way when he went there, but after 5 years, he kind of acted different. And even in Washington, D.C., where we were when he was at Georgetown, he, he did his own thing. He didn't treat me the way he used to treat me. And I was pretty surprised. I was disappointed. And we had some fights about it. He'd leave without telling me where he was going. There were no cell phones. So I'd lose track of him the whole day. He'd go to the library, supposedly. He'd come home at midnight. I had no way of knowing where he was, what he was doing. And I sadly started to realize that this man had changed. He had changed, and we had a lot of fights at the time. And even though I had thought that when we come to America we'll go back to normal and we would have a good marriage, it was not easy. It was difficult, and he wanted to. When I knew him in college, he wanted to fit in with America. He came from England. He was a student in America. He wanted to fit in. Now he was a Saudi, a very rich Saudi. Everybody was like fussing over him. He's a Saudi Arabian. He wanted to be a rich Saudi in America. He didn't want to be fitting in with the Americans anymore. So he gave me a lot of trouble. He didn't want me to work, but I did it. He was never home, so I did it when he wasn't there. He didn't know what I was doing. He would come home at midnight from supposedly the library. There were times when I found things like after Halloween, I saw some sparkles in the back of his car, like he had brought some people around in his car and maybe they were wearing a costume. I thought maybe he went to Halloween party. Like I didn't know, and he didn't tell anyone he was married in his law school. None of the students that he was friendly with knew that he was married. So I realized he was kind of living a double life, and that was pretty upsetting. And so, we continued going in and out of like fighting and then happy, then fighting and then happy. And then we ended up moving after he graduated, we moved to England. And a whole nother episode, occurred where he was actually, I caught him cheating and I realized this is really getting bad. And finally we had to call it quits. I caught him and he didn't even apologize. He said, "I'm Saudi and I can have 4 wives." And I was like, "Yeah, it's true, but I won't be one of those 4 wives. That's all. No problem. Let's just get a divorce." And unfortunately, that's not his idea of what he wanted. He kind of wanted me to accept. I mean, if he had said to me when I dated him, "I'm dating you. If we get married, I can have 4 wives," I would have like laughed. I would have said, "Oh, that's very sweet, but I'm not the girl for you." But it happened slowly, and it's almost like sometimes things change slowly, and you can't really see it. But when that happened, and he said, "I can have 4 wives," I quickly realized that this has totally, totally changed, and it's gotten out of hand. This is not something I want to be. Unfortunately, we had our 2 children at the time, and I had a big legal battle with him. He did not want to get divorced. He did not want me to continue on with my life, and he fought me, and it took a lot of money. I had to sell everything I had to pay my lawyers. I had to get specialists, international lawyers. I had to petition the State Department. I was like 30 years old. And then they forced me to give my children to him, unsupervised visitation. Our law system, they give you, you're innocent until proven guilty. So I said he threatens to kidnap them. They said, "Well, he's not a kidnapper. There's nothing that would indicate that he's a kidnapper because he's never kidnapped anyone." Well, I had to hand them over, and my 2 kids were gone within an hour. They were on a plane and out of the country.
Well, at
So
that point, at that point, you had moved back to the States. You were living
yeah,
in.
we were living in Florida. And he took up polo. He decided he didn't feel like working, even though he went to law school. I thought he'd be a lawyer. He decided he didn't really need to work, so why bother? He started playing polo, and he became even more of a playboy. And so he was in Florida. It's a place where they have these, a big polo season, international tournaments and everything. And so we were down in Florida. We had a house, and he took the children in Florida, and I didn't see them again for
So the
14
state
years.
the State Department wouldn't help you.
They really said they couldn't help me because there is something called the Hague Convention Treaty. It's a treaty between most of the countries in the world and the United States, and it dictates what the criteria is for any type of legal situation where there's a divorce between an American and a foreigner. And most countries signed it, and they allow for extradition if the husband tries to take the children, let's say, to France. There is the Hague Treaty, and it says wherever the children, they do what is best for the children. If the children are French and they were raised in France and they speak French and they're in school in France, an American woman can't really say, "I want my children home in America with me." If the husband doesn't agree to that, they have to really share them, and they look at the children's well-being. If the children are habitually in a country, one of the 2 countries, that's where they tend to allow them to stay, and then you go on visitation to the other country during their school break, maybe summertime, Christmas time. But Saudi did not sign the Hague Treaty, so there are no laws deciding this. The only laws that the Saudis recognize is their own Saudi law, which is Islam in its most fundamental form. That is a fact. not just me saying it, it's a fact. They have their own way of doing things, and they will not adhere to any other country's laws. They do not. So I was stuck with that. And so the State Department basically threw their hands up and said, look, we can't help you. It's your bed. You made it. You lie in it. Nobody told me. Nobody warned me. Everyone, and you know, it was so hurtful. A lot of my friends said, well, what's wrong? Why? We're the United States. Well, can't you get a senator or rich, or somebody to talk to? Okay. No, no. There was nobody to talk to. There was nobody that could help me. People suggested that I send somebody in to kidnap my children back. Like, I was 30 years old. I didn't have family in the military. I mean, maybe if I had a cousin who was a red beret, green beret, or a Marine, maybe I could have asked him, do you know any mercenaries? I didn't know anyone like that. All I knew was I could hire a lawyer, and the lawyer would tell me, look, I'll see what I can do, talk to the State Department. I'm involved right now with an organization called Find My Parents. Actually, they've asked me to be on the board, and I'm just starting with them now, but I had spoken to them for years. They specialize in reuniting children with their other parents.
So how old were your kids when they were?
How old were my kids?
When your husband took them back to Saudi Arabia, how old were they at that time?
2 and 4. My son
so
Kareem.
So little.
Yes. My daughter Sultana was born in Florida. She was 2 years old. She was still in diapers. She was just starting to speak her first words. And my son Kareem was a very precocious 4-year-old. And he was accepted at the Beauvoir School in Washington, D.C. for kindergarten. He was going to start that coming September. He spoke English. He was very clever, but that's about it. They were children. They were babies, and they were both taken at that age, and they never saw me again. I mean, when my son opened the door and saw me when I knocked on his door when I first met him, when he opened that door, he literally looked at me like as if I was delivering a pizza or something. He's like, "Oh, who are you?" And I said, "I'm your mother." And he had no idea. Hadn't seen a picture. I think my hairstyle was different. 14 years. I think I had I used to dye my hair very dark when I was it was a look, the old days. And I came in a different color hair, different from maybe, I don't even know if he saw pictures of me. I guess he had a recollection from when he was 4, but he had no idea who I was.
So how did you get to that point where you got to his door? You had all these years of trying to find him and trying to find both of them.
Right. Okay. So after all the fighting, State Department, nothing, nobody could help me. I started, 14 years I went on my own, my life. I started my business. I actually remarried, had another daughter. And one day, like 13 years later, I was sitting in my office and the phone rang. It was a gentleman who had been friends with my ex-husband years ago. And he called me. He said, I never told his name. I'm not telling it now. He said, I visited the family in Saudi. Your daughter really needs a mother. I felt heartbroken for her. She was 14 at the time. And he said, your son is like living like the prince. He's very happy. He plays polo with his dad. And he is now in a boarding school somewhere. And I think it might be the United States. I'm not sure. But I heard talk about him being in a boarding school. So I was like, oh my God, okay, thank you. I will never tell anyone you said this to me. And so I got a private investigator, Bo Deedle, actually. He was pretty high profile. I figured if he can't do it, nobody can. And they found my son at Culver Military Academy in Indiana. My son was a graduating senior. It was May, and he was graduating in about a week. So I looked through all the information I could find online about Culver, and I saw that he was accepted at Boston University, and I thought, okay, I could jump in the car right now, drive to Indiana, I'd never been there. I could bang on the gates of a military academy and say, I'm the mother of Kareem Abbar. I don't know. I just felt like this is too crazy. I'll probably embarrass him. He's young. He's like 17. This won't go well. I thought about it. Okay, I found out he was going to BU, and I waited until September. I figured he'll be in school. He'll have his own place. He'll be feeling more grown up. He won't be in a military school where, in fact, since then I've spoken to people. They said yes, it's all surrounded with walls and gates and guards at the door. You could not have gotten in. So I'm glad I made that choice. And I worked all summer, working on what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to approach him. And I got his address from, as soon as he moved to Boston, I got the address of where he was going to, where his apartment was. And I drove there. I got in the car one morning. I woke up and I said, okay, today's D-Day. So I got in the car, drove to Boston. The first chapter describes it. I can't even imagine. You can't even imagine how scared I was. How scared I was. It's like, for me, this was like Operation D-Day. I, if it had gone bad, I don't know what I would have done. So, but it went well. I got in. The concierge in his building saw me there. I said, I'm looking for Kareem Abbar. He goes, oh, I'll take you up. And he went up in the elevator with me and walked down the hall with me. And although I would have preferred he hadn't been there, he was. So I said, okay, well, he's going to have to be the witness. And we knocked on the door, and Kareem answered the door. And as I said, he looked at me and smiled and said, who are you? And I told him I'm his mother. And he was shocked. The doorman was shocked. But I begged, please let me in. Please don't shut the door. Please. I just came here to talk to you. And he let me in. And so I sat there and I talked to him briefly and, tried to keep it very calm because a lot of times boys that are 17, 18 years old, they don't like crying and drama. Sometimes ladies are more dramatic and boys get embarrassed. So I thought I'm just going to keep it really calm and I'll help him digest what's happening. And it worked. He agreed to have dinner with me that night. I came back and picked him up for dinner. We had a lovely dinner, and I said, okay, Kareem, I want to get to know you. You're here for 4 years. I'd like to come every month and drive up and have dinner with you. Would you be open to that? And maybe then we can have even more. And he said, yes, I'm open to that. So he was open to me. He was willing to get to know me. And I worked on it for 4 years. And now, we know each other well. And we missed all those years of his growing up. But we have what we have now.
What about your daughter?
Sultana, what about my
Sultana,
daughter?
yeah.
Sultana, yes. Well, I decided that, I heard that she was she was graduating high school in Saudi and she was going to come to the United States also. And that's a blessing. Both my children, although they didn't know their mother, knew that they were half American and they knew that their mom lived in America, although they didn't know where. I was no longer in Florida. I was no longer in Washington, D.C. I was in New York. They had no way of knowing that. But Sultana decided to go to Wellesley. It's almost like, when there's a dog and you leave them somewhere, they go over and they sit in the place where they last saw you. My dog does it. Every time I go out of the room, she goes and sits in my spot and waits for me to come back. Well, both my kids came back to Boston, which is where they knew I was with their dad, and so I heard that that Sultana was going to Wellesley, and I was able to contact her on the newfangled internet. She had a Hotmail email address, and I got it from one of her relatives that knew that I was seeing Kareem and said, you can contact Sultana on Hotmail. So I contacted her and she said she was very excited. She was going to Wellesley. And I drove up there when she arrived and got her at the airport and took her to her dorm. And I gave her the tour of Wellesley and we went out, we got her bedding, and it was like mother-daughter. And a
Wow.
girl I'd never seen since she was 2.
Wow.
And
Wow. This
so we rebuilt our relationship, and we are very close right now.
well this
I
this is
ride
an amazing
horses. He
story.
rides horses. We live in right now. We're both in West Palm Beach, which is where we have a big horse show going on in the winter, and she comes here all winter long with her horses. I watch her ride. She comes to my house for dinner. We're very close. We
Well,
talk
this
all the
is it's a wonderful story. Well, the book is so well written, and you make the story so fascinating. The entire process of what you went through, your struggles, and and all the things you did to get back together with your kids. And this is a beautiful story that you've told. The process of writing has also, I think, been a great help to you.
It has. It has. It's really, sometimes it's not good to keep things in. I learned that sometimes you have to talk about your pain, talk about your experiences, own them, come to terms with them, hear what other people have to say, accept that. I mean, I've had people say critically, like, what on earth were you thinking? And you know what? I accept that. I agree. I agree. And I've told people, I've explored this so much. I've almost like, you have to keep talking and admitting it and hating yourself and then loving yourself and then healing yourself. It's just a never ending process. And if you keep it in, it'll just fester. So I found that at the beginning, I wouldn't even admit to people that I'd been married before. When I had my daughter Amanda, it was like 6 years later. I didn't even tell anyone in the neighborhood. My husband and I moved into a new neighborhood. I didn't tell anyone I had other children. In fact, one of my friends said to me, "Gee, you seem to know a lot more about children than a new mom. What? How do you?" And I wouldn't tell her I had had two other children. I wouldn't admit anything to anyone. I was just too like angry at myself and lost. I thought I'd cry if I tell them. I can't. I don't know how to say it. I don't know what they're going to think of me, and it was really bad. So the more I discussed it, the more I think, I did go to therapy for a long time, and I was in group therapy, and everybody was loving, hating, critical. That's how group therapy is. Everybody reacts to you in their own way, and it's all acceptable. It's all acceptable in therapy. You say your feelings, and that's it. Other people have to understand that those are your feelings. So I learned how to defend myself. I learned how to forgive myself. And writing the book, it just, it was a really cathartic thing for me. And discussing it with people, I'm thankful that people want to discuss it with me. I'm very thankful that I can explain myself. Every time I talk about it, I feel more at peace with what happened.
Well, your story is an important story and will help some people to understand and perhaps to think about it doesn't matter who you're marrying, from any country, from America, but to think about who you're marrying and what that person is going to be like and make sure that you are really on the same page because and especially of course if it's a foreigner because you don't want to go through all this international mess. It costs you a lot of money, a lot of just a lot of worry. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this book, but I think
Yeah.
also your attitude, you did find parts of your life to enjoy and you did meet a lot of wonderful people when you were in Saudi Arabia. I think you've done a beautiful job. I think you're going to be writing more. Certainly you have a lot to say.
Yes, I do. In fact, I have a few books I'm thinking about writing. It's funny. If I do it, it would be based on a true story, but I have to embellish a lot because the lady I know that I would be writing about doesn't remember all the details. But I'm also considering writing another book about the aftermath of what my first book was. And then I have two characters that I know that I thought about writing about them. And I've been asked to write a children's book too, which that would be fun.
That would be fun.
I
Well,
was talking about my horses, and there's one horse in particular, Hudson. I loved him so much. And I thought about writing a book, a children's book about Hudson. So I have all these ideas. I'm focusing for the first 6 months of this book, I'm focusing on this book. I'm not going right away to write another book. I want to really give this book all I have, see how far I can take it. and then we'll see what's next. But it is really nice to be able to. I love, and I love. You know what I love? If with my interior design work, I have clients, and I focus on the client. I focus on talking to the client, like drawing out what they want for their home, what their needs are, what their ideas are, how I can make it real for them and make them happy. What are they going to do in their home? It's all about them. And that's fine. This is a service business that I'm in. And I've done this for 30 years. This book, writing a book, it's it's all about me. All about me. And it's not weird. And I'm not selling expensive furniture and expensive window treatments and expensive rugs. I'm selling something that costs $29 for the book, $14 for the paperback, and like $3.99 for the ebook. Like I can give it away. I walk around giving away books, like to like the dog groomer. I went in there. I gave a book to every lady at my dog's groomer salon, and they were all so thankful. I can talk to people about it. It's like I get to interact with the entire world, and I can be generous to everyone.
That's what books do. That's what writing does.
It's
And
so much fun.
that's why at the beginning of the program I always say Joy on Paper is a program for writers and those who dream of writing. And then I know that once people start writing, they can't stop. I'm sure you're going to be back here many times.
Thank
You're really a joy to talk to. Written a wonderful book, and I know that you're having great publicity and getting out there and talking to people, which also gives you a lot of joy. So thank you so much for joining me today. Patricia Bonis, JEDDAH Bride. Are you on social media, Facebook, that kind of thing?
Yes, I am. I have an Instagram, JEDDAH Bride Book, and I'm also getting a website created. It took a little longer than I thought, but it's Patricia Bonis Author.
Okay.
Com, and that will be all my interviews and everything will be posted. Look for me. I'm excited. I've had people contact me that haven't said, "Oh my God, I had an email on my Instagram the other day, a message from a lady that knew me in Jeddah, and she said to me, Patricia, this is blah blah blah. Do you remember me? I have to tell you, we were so upset. Our children used to play when they were very young, and then when they came back to Saudi and you weren't there with them, we were so dismayed. I am so enthralled when I read your book, and I would love to discuss it with you and share anything that we could about it. I mean, these people are, there were so many people, they didn't even know what happened because it's such a hush hush country. Nobody would tell them.
Well, Patricia, thank you so much for joining me today on Joy on Paper Live. It's been great talking to you, and I know, as I said, you will be back. Okay?
Thank you, Patsy. It was a pleasure. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Bye
Bye
bye now.
bye.
Bye. It was fun to talk to Patricia Bonis about her book, JEDDAH Bride. Please subscribe to Joy on Paper Live so that I can bring you more interviews with fascinating authors. All you have to do is click that button, subscribe, like, share, and comment. Especially comment, because authors really appreciate your comments. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bye bye.